Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Paolo Frankel. I'm the head of the Renewable Energy Division at the IEA, and it's my real pleasure to welcome you to this public webinar on the IEA Renewables 2020 report. Now, this study is an annual flagship report offering a market forecast for renewables over the next 5 years. Not just the electricity, but also heat and transport. But I must say this year is a very special one with a lot of first time. First of all, due to the COVID-19, it is the first time we actually had two editions in this year. Our first update in May, making a first impact of the crisis, followed then by the full edition in November. It is obviously the first time we focus on an impact on a crisis with such a detail, and you will see in a few minutes that we will have a lot of focus on the resilience of renewables, or to be more precise, of parts of the renewables energy. It is also the first time the report is freely available on our website. And actually, we are content of the web format, which we think increase the readability of the information and allows a much quicker access to the information that is mostly interesting for you. It is the first time that we offer a comprehensive data visualization tool with detailed data on 40 countries and aggregated regions and technologies and sub-technologies. And Amy, yes, please launch this video. As you can see, you can look per sector. So for instance, the electricity in the world, but then you can see a specific technology like offshore wind generation for the world, with the data going back from 2000 to 2025. So it combines the statistical data with our market forecasts. Amy, next. I see. Okay, so that end, you can see a lot of other details on technologies, and I'm sure we can also offer more detail on the video. Now, let me turn to the first message and the slide of this presentation, which is, first of all, looking at the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on total energy demand. These are these red bars here, which is totally unprecedented. It is much stronger than the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. At the same time, it is different by sector. So it is a -2% of electricity demand worldwide. No wonder. Electricity was actually incredibly important in these months, including now, to allow, first of all, the operation of hospitals, and second, the operations of IT, allowing us to do the so many electronic interactions. It's a hit in demand heat, and a big hit, obviously, in the demand of transport fuels due to the constraints on the mobility. Next. And here comes the assessment of how renewables have responded to the crisis. And you can see a striking difference between the renewable electricity, which showed an almost 7% of growth in electricity generation this year. Heat is basically stable, little bit of going down, and this is the reflection of two different trends in industry and buildings. And then there is a major hit in transport biofuels, which suffer actually more than the transport fuel themselves. Overall, the renewables increase by 1% in final energy use and are the only source of energy that has shown this resilience to the crisis. So with that, and with the question why renewable electricity was resilient to this crisis, what has underpinned this impressive trend, I will give the floor to my colleague Amy Bahar, who was the project director and lead author of Renewables 2020, and who will also be the moderator of the rest of the session today. And please, can I remind everybody that you can type in questions in the Q&A section of this webinar. Thank you so much. The floor is to you, Jaime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paolo, for this great introduction. And you set the scene very well in terms of the rest of the presentation, which my colleagues and the others authors of the publication will join me one by one, providing their perspectives in the coming slides. But I would like to start with exactly when Paolo left off. This was basically the resilience of renewables. So we looked at several indicators of resilience in order to understand granularity of the situation, country by country and indicator by indicator. I would like to present here two important indicators. One is the equity performance. Why equity performance is important? Two reasons. First of all, it has an initial indication of the financial health of the companies and how they deal with the crisis as a company. The second one, medium to long-term perspective, whether these companies are expected to grow in the future or not. Since the beginning of the year, obviously all sectors, including energy sector, was hit by the COVID-19 crisis. This demand shock hit multiple companies in multiple sectors. But what we see that energy sector from the beginning of the year to today obviously declined significantly when the crisis hit in March, then shows slight recovery, but since then it's been overall 40% down when it started the year. On the other hand, when you look at wind turbine manufacturers, investors of wind, and solar manufacturers, we see a completely opposite trend. Of course, they were impacted by the crisis in the beginning of the March and throughout March and April. However, we saw an important rebound of the wind and solar companies in various stock markets that we analyzed. This shows two things. First of all, there's an expectation that renewables remain strong and they are resilient, and the demand will continue to attract investment. And secondly, although they were hit and multiple companies were revised their growth expectations, they remain very strong. Wind and solar companies almost doubled since the beginning of the year in terms of their equity performance. The other indicator that we looked is the auction data, whether governments are willing to auction more renewable capacity as planned. In the beginning of the year, we saw certain delays, but not cancellations. And when we compare January to October auction results versus this year, we saw that actually this year, not only government auctions record level of capacity compared to last year, we also saw that the companies are willing to bid in those auctions, and those capacities are allocated more than 50 gigawatts. So I would like to highlight the importance of this resilience. When we come to the forecast, in 2019, renewables broke a record in terms of capacity additions. And in the beginning of this year, and actually in May, when we did the update, as Paolo mentioned, we basically looked at the immediate impact of COVID-19 at the time on renewables, and there were obviously supply chain problems, disruptions, and construction halts, and so on and so forth. But then 6 months down the road, when we analyzed further in detail, first of all, we saw that renewables adapted extremely rapidly to the new normal of COVID-19. And instead of a decline, we actually expect a record level growth of renewables in 2020. About 200 gigawatts we expect to come online, which is, again, I would like to repeat, despite the crisis, we will see a record level growth. Obviously, this record growth is driven by wind and hydropower plants, while we expect solar PV to be a little bit flat around 107 gigawatts in 2020. When we look at 2021, we expect actually a double-digit growth again. So you may think that the crisis affects maybe not very short term, but a little bit on the next year, and we don't see that in our forecast. We expect 2021 to be another record year with a double-digit growth, and this is now solar comes into the picture significantly, and this growth is actually fastest since 2015 that we see. 2021, we will see a retesting of the resilience of renewables. Why do we say retesting? The reason is very simple, not because of COVID, in our opinion, but mostly in terms of the policy deadlines and uncertainties, where my colleagues will enter into detail in their slides very soon. I would like to, before handing it to my colleagues, I would like to highlight a very important driver of our forecast. First one is obviously cost and cost declines, but the second one is policies. As you can see here, policies remain an important pillar of renewable energy growth, especially wind and solar PV. There are two important trends that we see in this figure. The first one, obviously, significant majority of the growth will come from competitively set policies, which is good because they reduce the prices and makes market more competitive. Not only that, obviously the majority will be auctions, but not only that, we see in the next 5 years an important shift towards policy measures or deployment measures that are outside of auction schemes or green certificates where governments lead this way. We see business-driven or such as corporate PPAs, merchant plants, or multiple remuneration schemes that basically driving 15% of the growth. If you were to look at this figure over the last 5 years, these kind of business-driven growth of renewables will be extremely limited. So this is a new trend that we see. It's 15%, may sound very small, but it's becoming more and more prominent. On this note, I would like to invite my 4 colleagues to the floor for the first panel, where we will discuss a little bit a few trends that are very regional. Especially, I would like to start with the top 4 markets. Those are basically China, European Union or Europe, United States, and India. My colleagues are on the floor, and I would like to start with obviously the biggest country in terms of the renewable capacity growth. China accounts for more than 40% of all renewable plants that will be built in the next 5 years. And Chanlu, our colleague who is actually in China, it's very late there, but he's still awake, will start explaining our forecast on China. Chanlu, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Hemi. For China, policy change often results in the boom and also bust cycles of renewable energy. And year 2020 and 2021 are no exception. Investors are rushing to commission solar PV and onshore wind projects in 2020, as most subsidy will be phased out by end of this year. This leads to a record year of renewable capacity growth. And for 2021, record offshore wind capacity is also expected to come online, in line with its subsidy phase out. However, the overall renewable capacity addition is lowered. And since the new 14th five-year plan on renewable energy as the top design for the coming 5 years will be issued by the end of 2021, the renewable industry really needs time to digest the new policy so that the downward trend cannot be reversed immediately. This leads to the valley of capacity addition in year 2022. Specifically, you can see the rapid growth of hydropower over year 2020 to 2022. This is largely owing to the commissioning of units from 2 mega-size projects called Wudongde and Baihetan. Beyond 2022, the new 14th five-year plan and supporting policies are supposed to inject renewed momentum into the growth of wind power and also solar PV, as annual 44 gigawatts of solar PV addition and also 23 gigawatts of wind power addition are expected. Comparatively, our accelerated case is about 20% higher than the main case, which can only be realized first if smooth policy transition can be made, and second, if the coming 14th five-year plan will be proposing ambitious targets and new policy frameworks for future renewable energy development. So much from my side for China. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chandler, for this quick explanation of the forecast. And as we can see, China obviously was running towards record growth in 2020. The pandemic is not really affected. It's mostly policy driven. I would like to turn to other few markets to understand the impact of COVID-19, but also the impact of policies in terms of driving renewables. And I'd like to turn to basically United States with Trevor, and to go a little bit understand the drivers and challenges of the United States forecast. Trevor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I think that what we're seeing this year is that the U.S. is resilient. And in fact, 2020 will see record renewable growth thanks to policy incentives and deadlines, which were actually extended for a year due to COVID. The wind market saw a very strong first half of the year, while the solar PV market has rebounded nicely in Q3 after a small dip due to COVID restrictions. However, as we look at the forecast period, we see that the U.S. is at a crossroads as federal and tax incentives begin to expire. As the figure shows, onshore deployment slows a bit due to policy step downs, while solar PV incentives decline less rapidly, leading to greater growth. But as equipment comes down and development costs come down, we're seeing new opportunities for expansion. Specifically, state-level renewable portfolio standards are encouraging utilities to incorporate additional renewable capacity into their power supply mix. In addition, states are including offshore wind in their larger decarbonization plans, help move that market forward, guaranteeing pricing while also removing some political barriers. In fact, we see the U.S. offshore wind market becoming the largest annual wind market by the end of the forecast period. In addition to what's going on at the state levels, we're already seeing businesses utilize corporate PPAs to increase the amount of green energy in their portfolios, giving developers an option to enter into long-term fixed contracts for their supply. And this is exemplified by the over 22 gigawatts of combined wind and solar corporate PPAs that have been signed in the last 2 years. And finally, individual consumers are also getting involved as solar PV prices come down. They're installing more rooftop systems in order to be able to take advantage of net metering those continue to be financially beneficial where available. So our accelerated case sees additional growth due to increased corporate buying as well as increased renewable portfolio standards. So Heyman, what we're really seeing here is a resilient market with emerging trends that could facilitate even more growth in the future.
Thank you very much, Trevor. So obviously, US is also at the crossroads as well. I would like to ask you a very quick follow-up question. Obviously, this forecast is done before the new administration will take their role in the coming months. So do you think this forecast will change with the new administration? If we were to do this forecast today, what kind of changes would you make?
Yeah. So I think that's a very good question. And if the new administration is able to implement their decarbonization goals that have been outlined, we anticipate a 14 to 18% higher growth than we have in our accelerated case. However, the pace of that depends on multiple factors, including the ultimate structure of the US Senate, which will have an impact on enacting policies that will help facilitate renewables additions.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Very quick and crystal explanation. So actually our forecast could be even higher than the accelerated case, depending on how the new policies are implemented. I would like to cross the Atlantic and move to Europe now. Obviously, it's a very large market as well, and where renewables actually start to pick up very fast over the past decade or 2 decades or so. I'd like to turn to Yasmina to explain us a little bit, because everybody talks about Europe, New Green Deal, 2030 targets, and what is the situation there? Is Europe resilient, and what are the drivers and challenges?
Thank you, Hemi. Yes, in fact, for 2020, we do expect growth in Europe to be resilient, even though it might not look like that on the graph, because we actually see that 2020 additions are actually lower than 2019. But I'd like to point out that's not due to COVID-19 at all. It's actually due to an exceptionally high year in 2019, predominantly due to Spain that added about 7 gigawatts due to a commissioning deadline. And so if we actually remove Spain from this picture, we can see a year-on-year growth of about 4% between 2019 and 2020. And we expect that growth to continue over the next few years, Hammy, if you will, accelerating all the way up to about 44 gigawatts on average between 2023 and 2025. And the main reason for this is Europe's 2030 targets and the policies that a lot of the countries have been putting in place over the last year to achieve that, predominantly in the form of auctions for utility scale. So in general, over the next 5 years, we expect about 250 gigawatts to come online. That'll be led by Germany, Hammy, if you will, where solar PV leads a majority of the growth. This is due to increased targets and an extension increase in auctions, but we do see challenges still in onshore wind due to permitting and social acceptance issues. The second largest market we expect to be France, with growth evenly distributed between PV and wind. This is due to strong capacity targets and a new auction scheme, but there's still permitting challenges for both technologies that France has to face. Spain re-enters the top 4 markets after years of some slow growth. This is due to 2 reasons. The first, that they've resumed competitive auctions, but they also have a really attractive corporate PPA market, although there is some downside risk there depending on the impacts of COVID-19 on the business case there. And the 4th largest European market we expect is to be the Netherlands, thanks to generous net metering and a new auction scheme. But again, onshore wind faces some permitting risks, some local opposition challenges, and grid constraints. Hammy, if you will. Growth could be 40% higher annually between 2023 and 2025 in Europe if 2 things happen. The first is some of these challenges that were just mentioned, if they are addressed. Predominantly, this would be in permitting for onshore wind in Germany, in France, and the Netherlands. And also if we saw additional growth outside of auctions, that would be in the form of corporate PPAs or utility procurement that would occur in Germany and Spain, which contributes to the high upside potential that you see there.
Thank you very much, Yasmina. This was very helpful to see that the picture that we presented on the policies on more corporate PPAs that are also becoming to be prominent in several European countries as well. I would like to turn now the 3rd largest market in terms of a country. This is obviously India. India has been challenged in multiple ways to achieve faster growth. It has very ambitious targets, and obviously it also hit significantly by COVID-19. I will let Piotr to explain our forecast for India and what did we take into account in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Jaime. Well, sadly, India seems to be a bit less resilient to COVID-19 than previously mentioned markets. We expect that renewable capacity growth in 2020 will be much lower than in 2019. In case of PV, we see a decrease by 1/3, and in case of wind, by as much as 2/3. Deployment in both technologies is also below our expectations from May report. This decrease is mainly due to massive disruptions caused by COVID-19 crisis. Even before the pandemic struck, we saw many projects delays in India, but COVID-19 has made the situation much worse. Those projects will eventually come online, leading to record wind and PV additions in 2021 and 2022. Actually, we expect that India will be one of the biggest contributors to global upswing in renewables growth in those years. The main driver of deployment will be auctions for utility scale projects. In case of PV, as you can see in the central figure, auction capacity reached record level already in the first 8 months of 2020, indicating stable growth perspective. We see much more challenging situation in case of wind. As you can see on the right-hand side figure, the allocated auction volumes are declining since 2018. It is getting more difficult to encourage investment, leading to stagnation of capacity growth close to level reached in 2021. Meanwhile, we also expect acceleration in hydropower deployment, with several big projects coming online after 2022. Our main forecast already puts India on a third place among the largest PV and onshore wind markets globally. However, several challenges should be tackled in order to fulfill India's much larger green ambitions. The most important and the persisting challenge is a poor financial health of DISCOMs. It has many adverse impacts, slowing down both utility scale investment, but even more so distributed PV adoption. If India takes decisive actions to improve DISCOM's financial stability, but also accelerate transmission grid development and make land acquisition easier for developers, and step up support for rooftop PV, it can achieve significant acceleration, especially in wind and distributed PV. Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you very much, Piotr, for this quick summary of the very big and important market for the global growth. And after this first 4 little geographical deep dives, I would like to go to the next smaller market as a deep dive. So I think we will have a swap of one panelist. Sophia will join us. I would like to start with Middle East and North Africa, which is an important region. Is that region will remain one of the smallest ones as historically was in the past? And do we see a long-term impact of the COVID-19 crisis in Middle East and North Africa? And actually, what are the other policy drivers that we see in Middle East and North Africa that will basically stimulate growth in the future? And Yasmina will be back with us to explain our trends in Middle East and North Africa region.
Thank you, Jaime. We actually see growth doubling over the next 5 years when we compare to the previous 5 years, adding about 30 gigawatts. And the main driver of that growth is expected to be solar PV, which is accounting for about 70% of total renewable capacity growth over the next 5 years. And what's actually really interesting, Jaime, if you don't mind clicking, is that the main drivers behind this PV growth are actually the net fossil fuel exporters that are driving this increase in solar PV. So in fact, we expect them to account for about 2/3 of the PV expansion over the next 5 years, which is a much higher share compared to the previous years. And so this is expected to come from countries such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar, because now the prices for solar PV have gotten so low that it's actually cost effective compared to oil and gas, where previously solar PV was competing against because it was produced domestically. Now, what is the reason behind these low prices? Jaime, if you will, it's due to the supportive policy environment in the form of auctions, which is supposed to account for about 80% of the PV growth over the next 5 years. And in fact, these competitive auctions have produced some of the lowest prices, or bids, excuse me, we've seen in the region over the last 5 years, ranging from about $13.5 per megawatt hour to about 16. And this is due to the fact that we've got good solar resources there, affordable access to financing and land, as well as economies of scale, because those projects can be quite big. But just to note there that those conditions are very market specific and they might not be repeatable in other markets. And so it's a really interesting trend that we're seeing in the region, but there's still room for higher growth, Jaime, if you will. We could see about 15 gigawatts more of capacity coming online if these auctions could happen at a faster pace, or if there was more visibility over the timeline to help investors with their planning. More accessible financing would also accelerate growth, particularly in the net importing countries where costs tend to be higher.
Thank you very much, Yasmina. Quite interesting that fossil fuel exporters are investing more and more in renewables. I'd like to do a little caveat here. In the report, we also did a small analysis about the oil companies' investments in renewables. And actually, we see that oil companies' investments in renewable projects will increase more than 8-fold in the next 5 years. So you may want to check that out in the report. I would like to turn into another region, which is an extreme potential for renewables and have actually chance to leapfrog basically on renewables. This is obviously Sub-Saharan Africa. We talk about it a lot at the IEA about electrification. However, I would like to turn to Trevor to explain a little bit the trends in Sub-Saharan Africa. Small region, great potential. What do we expect?
Yeah, Amy, you're correct. And in fact, we see 50% more capacity growth within the forecast period. And this is a great increase, but it does represent only 2% of global growth. So we see that there are room for increased additions. COVID-19 did slow some development as there was shutdown of construction sites in South Africa or cross-border trade restrictions that impacted development timelines, but projects have resumed construction since the first wave. So what we're seeing is that challenges have preceded COVID and will outlast the pandemic, especially as the figure shows as expansion shifts from large-scale hydro, which represented the majority of additions in 2016, to solar and wind, which represent the majority additions at the end of the forecast period. You can see there is plenty of interest in developing in sub-Saharan Africa, but some of that capacity is not realized due to myriad reasons. In order for governments to continue to attract financing from international financial institutions, they need to provide guarantees in order to mitigate risks. Those risks include off-taker risk, project delays, or land rights issues. And while governments have sought to mitigate those risks historically, retroactive renegotiations or stringent requirements have further impeded project development even after financial close. The good thing is that we're seeing unique solutions to address these problems, such as governments including land development rights within a solar tender, as we saw in Ethiopia, or international organizations providing grants to guarantee payment for production, helping reduce that off-taker risk. But it's also important to realize that these policies need to be combined with grid investment. A really good example is a 100 megawatt wind farm that was completed in Kenya this year, required a 17-kilometer transmission line to be built in order to connect to the grid. So this additionally shows what is required for these projects to not just to be connected to the grid to realize the potential. But while all of these are challenges, we're starting to see them be addressed, which is going to continue to open up the potential of Africa, specifically and especially with solar PV, which is going to be crucial to post-COVID economic recovery.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Very interesting trends. Actually, there's still a lot of hydro potential there, but already we see a big switch towards wind and solar PV. We go to the next region, which also has incredibly high potential, but so far very limited growth outside of few countries. This is Southeast Asia. As you know, it's a coal-based region. Most of the countries are still producing most of their electricity from coal. Let's look at how renewables will play a role in that region before that. So I will turn to Piotr now.
Thank you, Amy. Well, our work on ASEAN finds that PV will dominate renewables growth in the next 5 years, drastically changing renewables power mix in the region. In case of onshore wind, we expect only slow growth due to limited policy support, but also due to low availability of land, especially in densely populated island countries. There is enormous potential for offshore wind. However, it is still mostly considered too expensive in ASEAN. We see only moderate progress in geothermal and bioenergy due to relatively high costs and resources constraints. In case of hydro, several projects are expected to come online in the next 5 years, but there is a limited potential left for sustainable big power plants. Therefore, PV remains a king of ASEAN renewables growth, with vast potential and possibility to even catch up in capacity with hydropower until 2025. However, our PV forecast starts with a big slowdown in 2020, when additions will reach only 3 gigawatts, 2/3 lower than in 2019. The main reason of this decrease is not COVID-19, but instability of regulation, which is the most important factor shaping deployment in ASEAN. In 2020, PV commissioning rush in Vietnam was over, marking the end of boom-bust cycle. After all, feed-in tariff phase-out plan for 2019 was extended until the end of 2020, allowing Vietnam to maintain relatively high growth this year, but much below 2019 level. During transition to PV auctions in Vietnam in 2021 to 2022, we see a slowdown in deployment in this country. However, faster growth in other countries like Philippines and Indonesia should keep regions additions close to 2020 level. After 2022, We expect that PV deployment in ASEAN will keep gaining momentum, with region's capacity growth reaching almost 5 gigawatts in 2025. ASEAN renewables additions can almost double by introducing stable policy support. It should focus on providing attractive tariffs for generators and reducing risks for investors. Fortunately, governments are starting to take action, with good examples from Indonesia and Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Now I would like to end this regional deep dives with Latin America, who got significantly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, as we all know the numbers. And the countries obviously are in an interesting macroeconomic situation. So I would like to turn to Sofia to give us a little bit of what we think renewables will do in the next 5 years in Latin America.
Thank you, Hemi. So the situation we see in Latin America varies from country to country. In 2020, we can see two key trends. So in markets like Brazil and Chile, the commissioning of wind and solar projects suffered just minor delays. But if you see in the left figure, we see that Brazil additions decreased in 2020. This is because of hydropower, because of the project Belo Monte, which was commissioned in 2019. So hydropower development in Brazil is actually played a major role in historic additions, and as you can see in the right figure. On the other side, we see Argentina and Mexico, where project commissioning actually suffered major delays because of COVID, with some projects temporarily halting constructions and others unable to connect to the grid. So in the next year, in 2021, we see an increase of additions because of those delayed projects coming online. For the rest of the forecast for 2023 onwards, we also see two key trends. In countries like Chile, we see accelerated growth thanks to the auctions that occurred in 2020 and one that is expected in 2021. On the other hand, we have countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico that have high degree of uncertainty, mainly because of the macroeconomic challenges imposed by COVID pandemic, as you mentioned, but also because of policy uncertainty and a reduced utility scale project pipeline because of the lack of auctions in these countries. So actually the macroeconomic challenges are especially important in countries like Brazil and Mexico, where the majority of the wind and solar scale additions come from outside of auctions. Something else that is worth signaling, and you can see in the right figure, is that we have an important technological shift in the region from hydropower to solar, which we expected to dominate the next 5 years. Now, our accelerated case assumes a faster deployment fostered by better financial conditions in the regions, regulatory certainty, and the resolution of those grid integration challenges. Thank you, Hemi.
Thank you very much, Sofia. So we basically traveled across the world, saw the different forecasts, regional and country level forecasts, and looked at COVID-19 impact versus non-COVID related impacts that is relevant to the forecast. I would like to share with you where all this capacity takes us in the next 5 years. Today, when we look at electricity markets, we see that renewables are the second largest source of generation. Coal remains basically the largest source in terms of generating electricity, as you can see in the figure, but we expect a major shift in the coming 5 years. We expect renewables to become the largest source of generation, surpassing an incredible landmark, in our opinion, by 2025. And this is obviously driven by multiple sources, but I would like to highlight that we did not talk that much of hydropower because its growth will be slow in the next 5 years, but it remains the largest source of renewable power generation, followed by wind, solar PV, and bioenergy. In terms of the capacity developments, many interesting trends are also happening. If you look at variable renewables, when we say wind and solar PV, their combined installed capacity is expected to surpass gas in 2023 and coal in 2024. So which means that wind and solar alone will be, the variable renewables alone will be the largest source of capacity of our global power system by 2025. So not only we will see renewables becoming the largest, but also an incredible increase in the penetration of wind and solar PV in the electricity markets in multiple countries. And the question that we get asked at the IEA every time we talk about basically this kind of variable renewable generation growth, about curtailment. Especially lately, we talked a lot about curtailment, and we actually in this report for the first time looked at curtailment in key markets and tried to analyze actually are system operators curtailing that much of electricity. And on this note, I would like to continue with my colleague Sofia, and I would like to invite other colleagues that will speak about other topics into the camera. The rest, you can turn off your camera. Sofia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hemi. So first, we need to understand that VRE curtailment depends on wind and solar production, but also on electricity demand. So the changes in demand seen by COVID-19 and the extreme weather conditions experienced in some regions are the reason why we've heard so much about curtailment. So looking into historical, we see that in key markets like China and Germany, curtailment rose significantly from 2010 to 2017. And China actually reached its maximum historical high with about 50 terawatt hours in 2016. But even though the curtailment has risen significantly in absolute terms, its share has remained stable, which means that most systems have been able to evolve to accommodate this increasing VRE generation. But how did this happen? How did they do it? So it has been demonstrated that investments, along with policy changes and coordination, can enhance system flexibility to reduce curtailment. So we see that in the case of China, additional interprovincial transmission capacity, improved market operations, and the implementation of investment warning mechanisms. This helped to lower the share of curtailment from 20% to less than 4%. Texas is another example where wind curtailment declined from 17% to 3%, thanks to a policy change that directed transmission investments to areas with high wind potential. So we see that as levels of curtailment of VRE rise, is with appropriate market design, changes to the way the grid is operated, as well as better forecasting, are ways to enhance the system flexibility and to cost effectively reduce curtailment. Of course, that modifying existing assets or investing in green infrastructure or new assets or development of storage technology will also be key and necessary to a reliable VRE integration. However, these investments should be done in a cost-effective way, making sure that the benefits of the investments will outweigh the costs. Thank you, Hemi.
Thank you very much, Sofia. This data set is a unique one. I recommend all the audience that are watching us to check our report to see this. For the first time, we looked at country by country this curtailment data or dispatch down data, depending on the definition. I would like to close the electricity chapter now and move into a very important sector, which Paolo mentioned in his first slide, that it's the most affected, most hit by the crisis. I will give the floor to Jeremy to explain us what is the reason behind this big hit of the biofuel sector during the crisis.
Thanks, Hemi. So as you can see, biofuels were particularly bad hit by COVID. It's the first drop in output in over a decade. So the question is, what exactly happened there? And there's a couple factors that are influencing. One, we saw an overall drop in transportation fuel demand of 8% between 2020 and 2019. And because most biofuel use is linked to mandates, we then expect biofuel use to decline with that decline in transportation fuel demand. But there's another component to it as well, because as transportation fuel demand declined, so did prices. And so we see a price impact as well in some of the markets. If we can click to the next visual, Hemi. So digging in a little bit deeper in different markets, we did see as we went into 2020 a bit of growth, especially on the biodiesel side, but that was more than offset by contractions in other markets, particularly in the United States for ethanol. And this is that first component that I mentioned, the reduction in demand for gasoline. Ethanol reduced very close to the same rate in the United States. But Brazil is a very different story. So we saw a big decline, 16.5% decline in ethanol in Brazil, and that surpassed the decline in gasoline demand. So there we saw this interesting price effect where prices for gasoline went down, and in Brazil is unique where people can choose, do I want to fill up with ethanol or do I want to fill up with gasoline? And so we saw this price response in Brazil. We also saw a significant decline in biodiesel in Europe, and that matched more a reduction in diesel demand as well. And we can click the next one. Putting those all together out to 2020, it's an 11.5% drop from 2019 levels. So a very big decline in biofuel production. We can move on to the next slide. We can click again, actually. So as you can imagine, forecasting transportation fuels in this environment is very uncertain. Case in point, in the Renewables 2020 report, we had forecast just 2 months ago with data thinking that in 2021, gasoline and diesel demand would return to 2019 levels. 3 or 4 days after the report was released, that forecast was already out of date, making it maybe one of the quickest out of date forecasts the IEA has produced. Thank you very much, COVID. We're now expecting, thanks to updated IEA data, that gasoline and diesel demand may recover closer to Q4 2021 or into 2022. And so biofuels may start to recover in that same time period, with the caveat that it depends on how the recovery to COVID happens. Now, the single positive point that I have in this somewhat dreary discussion for global biofuels is looking out to 2023 or 2025. In that time period, thanks to policies in different countries and an assumption that gasoline and diesel demand will recover, we expect that biofuel production is going to increase, not just in volume terms, but also as a percentage of total transportation fuels. That's in different areas of the world. We're expecting an increase in ethanol production, especially in China and Brazil, HVO, particularly in the United States and Europe, and then biodiesel, especially in Southeast Asian countries. And that'll help bring biofuels as a percentage of energy and transportation fuels from 4.8% today up to 5.5% by 2025. So growth in absolute terms and also the share of transportation fuels. And that's it for me, Hemi.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for this quick summary of biofuels market. Obviously, there are many reasons behind the decline and uncertainty beyond 2020, how these markets will recover. Let's see how those uncertainties affect the heat markets, which is the largest consumption and use of all energy demand. So I would like to turn to Francois to explain us a little bit the heat market situation. We usually talk about less on heat as a topic. It's less sexy, but we would like to highlight some kind of resilience of heat as well. And Francois, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Amy. I would like to start with a brief recall of the heat context. So as you said, Amy, heat is the largest energy end use globally. It accounts for half of total final consumption. The heating sector is still massively dominated by fossil fuels today. That means that the sector is a major greenhouse gas emitter, and inefficient, the so-called traditional uses of biomass are still substantial in various regions with dramatic health, social, and environmental impacts. Renewable heat uptake has been very slow so far. The share of renewables in heat has increased by only 2 percentage points in the last 10 years, and it is expected to remain below 11% in 2020. The largest contribution to the renewable heat growth over this period was from renewable electricity, in particular in buildings, thanks to electric boilers and heat pumps. So next slide. So what happened to renewable heat in 2020? Well, the most striking fact is the demand shock that affects industry due to reduced activity levels. This shock translates into a temporary 4% drop in industrial bioenergy consumption, since subsectors like pulp and paper or cements are impacted. The United States and Brazil are the countries which record the largest drop. In the building sector, however, even with a slightly declining heat demand, renewable heat consumption goes up. This is mostly driven by renewable electricity, and the main factor for this is the rising share of renewables in power generation. Next. So turning now to next year's perspectives, we expect global renewable heat consumption to increase 20% by 2025 from last year levels. Most of this growth happens in buildings. Bioenergy and renewable electricity for heat should be the largest absolute, see the largest absolute growth. But solar thermal also makes a significant contribution with a 40% increase in consumption by 2025. Regarding bioenergy in particular, we see a key role for clean cooking stoves in Africa and India. And I also want to point out that ambient heat harnessed by heat pumps is increasingly important, but data is currently lacking to provide robust global estimates. Yet, despite this growing trend, the share of renewables in heat may only reach 12% by 2025, and this is because industrial heat demand increases at the same time. This means very little CO2 emission reduction unless government engage in stronger policies. Talking about policies, various measures announced in economic stimulus plans are expected to benefit renewable heat in coming years. Some are new or additional financial support for technologies, and others support building retrofits, which also indirectly helps create new opportunities for renewable heat. Finally, I'd like to add that given current low fossil fuel prices, financial support for renewable heat is very welcome to improve its cost competitiveness, but regulatory policies still remain very important to overcome other non-economic challenges. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you very much, François, for this quick summary of a very important sector, and the sector that is really needed to decarbonize in order to reach any long-term target that we would like to tackle, basically the climate change challenge that we have. Now, I would like to bring all these together and connect it with the crisis. The COVID-19 crisis obviously brought a lot of challenges, healthcare-wise, economic-wise, financing-wise. We basically feel this in our daily lives. But at the same time, we see that there is a lot of governments who are introducing so-called stimulus packages to, first of all, help their economies, but also for the economic recovery. What we did this year at the IEA, first of all, we are the first ones to talk about clean energy transitions right after the COVID-19 crisis, and mentioned this multiple times that this was an opportunity, brought ministers together in order to discuss how new economic growth can come from decarbonized sources and sectors. And I would like to give the floor now to Andrea, who worked on the stimulus packages information that we collected at the IEA. And the result is quite interesting. And let's see where do we stand today on stimulus and how the clean stimulus will evolve.
Thanks, Amy. Yes, so we had a closer look at the announced stimulus packages as of the end of October, including both individual government packages and the European Union's Next Generation EU proposal. And our analysis focused on the energy-related spending. In the government packages we analyzed, we saw that more than half of the total amount gives immediate relief to consumers and producers of energy, first of all, in the areas that have been affected the most strongly, such as aviation, transport, as just mentioned by my colleague, and electricity. The clean energy spending component of those measures is relatively low. When it comes to economic stimulus, more than half of the total amount is actually targeting clean energy. So this is what you can see on the slide. We can see that it targets mainly those sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize and where more effort is still needed, such as infrastructure and transport and energy efficiency. When it comes to the proposed EU package, and Amy, please click, thank you. This one has only a small relief component, as it aims primarily at helping member states recover and kickstart their economies. But what the EU has is a 37% earmarking for climate-related spending, and that makes it the giant, basically, among the green recovery packages. And we expect the majority of this to flow into energy. Particularly, we estimate infrastructure and transport, as well as energy efficiency measures to be given priority in spending, and also a minor share to go to renewable electricity. Given that governments have actually already engaged in long-term energy planning, we don't expect this money to renewables to trigger additional capacity, but we rather think this will create additional liquidity for existing projects and plans. However, many government packages also include support for green hydrogen and new green hydrogen plants. So we see this as an opportunity to raise further renewable electricity capacity in the future if the electricity needs won't be served by existing plants. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I just mentioned, one of the sectors that's been hit particularly hard by the pandemic is the aviation industry. And that industry has seen a 60% decline in global air travel demand in only the first half of 2020 compared to 2019. So we had a look at around $76 billion worth of financial support that governments provided to 30 airlines. And in total, those 30 airlines represent roughly 40% of 2019's passenger activity. We found that more than 3/4 of the total support has been agreed without any link or conditions related to environmental performance. There were only 2 airlines, Air France and Austrian Airlines, that are subject to conditions requiring a 2% sustainable aviation fuel blend rate in the future. Therefore, we don't expect the COVID-19 crisis to be a game changer when it comes to accelerating low carbon fuel deployment, because the additional SAF demand from those 2 airlines is relatively minor if we compare to existing offtake agreements that several airlines already entered into before the pandemic. However, if a 2% SAF blending requirement had been applied as a condition to the support given to those 30 airlines, this could have created annual demand more than 50 times the current production levels, and that would have boosted the prospects for investment in new SAF production capacity considerably. So it is true that currently SAFs still have higher costs than fossil jet fuel, especially given the low oil price environment at the moment. But to put that cost difference into perspective, if a 1% SAF blend rate had been applied across the entire industry back in 2019, this would have increased the aviation industry's fuel bill by only around $2 billion, which is just 3% of the financial support that governments provided to those 30 airlines that we analyzed for our report. Back to you, Jaime.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this quick update on the green stimulus. And at the IEA, we will keep tracking green stimulus in the coming months and probably years and their implementation. So please bear with us in the coming months. We will probably publish more reports on this. Thank you very much for listening to us. Now I would like to actually give the floor to you. Not the floor to you. We cannot hear your voice, but you can always type your questions. I already received multiple questions, which I will start answering myself, some of them, and some of them asking my colleagues. I will mention their name if I will need their help in answering certain questions, but already 4 of you can stay here. Don't go, because there are a few questions that I need your help. As I said, you can type your questions in the question box. I will be able to see and ask them when the time allows. The first question is on Francois, solar thermal markets. There is a question on what do we expect on the solar thermal markets, in which regions, and do we expect a significant growth? You already mentioned as a global scale the importance of solar thermal, but I also would like to give after you the floor to Sophia, because she was doing the solar CSP market, solar thermal for electricity generation, maybe she can give some of the insights on that one as well, if the time allows. Francois, do you want to say a few words on the solar thermal market and maybe a little bit on China?
Yes, of course. Solar thermal, well, that's a technology for which we expect quite some resilience. It is expected the solar thermal consumption is expected to increase more than 4% in 2020, so it's pretty much similar with the year before. And most of this increase is still expected to be in China. However, China is shrinking domestic markets because solar thermal water heater, which used to be installed mostly in roofs, are also entering in competition for rooftop space with solar PV, and also because there is a trend of electrification of heat, and therefore heat pumps are also adding to the competition. Behind China, the next biggest market for the next years is the United States, and after that the Middle East countries.
Thank you, Francois.
Maybe
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will just add also that the technological simplicity of the system and limited maintenance are still a very important asset for this technology, and that's why there's a lot of small markets for which we still expect quite a strong growth in the future.
Thank you very much. Sophia, do you want to say one or two sentences on the other component of the solar thermal market? Because we have been doing the forecast for years now, changing our forecast every year based on the projects. Do you want to say a few words on that?
Yes, so tying it a little bit to Latin America, this year in Chile, the biggest CSP plant is expected, Cerro Dominador, to come online. And this year, apart from Chile, there's other projects coming online in China. For future development, China is still playing a key role, but there are other projects being developed as well in the United Arab Emirates and Morocco as well. And in general, this technology, because it's usually coupled with storage, thermal storage, it's quite relevant for and quite versatile for the diverse uses. Like it depends on the configuration of the plant, but it can be used for a speaker or as load base. So in general, it allows a lot to give a lot of flexibility to the systems.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie. Another question is related to your slide on the variable renewables, as you were referring to storage as an option. And some of the, I mean, I'm combining questions here, I'm not asking one by one, but they ask whether we expect a huge amount of storage going forward. And just to let me start answering that question, we do not do storage forecast in this report. Obviously, in the next 5 years, the cost will come down. But in terms of the integration question, Sophia, is when is the storage coming? At what level in terms of the cost? Should we invest in a lot of storage today in order to deal with the VRE shares, or we have still time?
So storage comes in different scales, as in there's storage that serves you could say balancing purposes of milliseconds, other are more medium term, long term. So it depends on the type of service that you're looking for your system. So we can also say, okay, you're maybe relating storage to batteries, but you can have also pump hydro, which is another form of storage. So in general, I think the question would really depend on the uses that you're asking for. But yeah, of course, it's to have some form of storage is key, but a lot of markets already have it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The next question is on hydrogen. And here there are multiple questions asking when green hydrogen will take off. And I will ask these questions to multiple people, and my boss, Paolo Frankel, also joined me in the room. Maybe you are not able to see him, but I'm going to ask him as well this green hydrogen question. I'd like to start on the stimulus package component, Andrea, to you. Obviously, if we can go back to maybe the slide, the previous slide, the green hydrogen was basically, we don't have it here. Do you remember, Andrea, how much, in terms of the scale, how much money went to green hydrogen?
I unfortunately can't tell you the exact figure by heart, but we can see that in the gray part that you can see on the slides, there is spending towards carbon capture and storage and battery storage, as well as green hydrogen. And I can tell you that green hydrogen is basically taking the lion's share in this gray segment, so it's quite a substantial amount.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was among all clean energy technologies, it's fourth or fifth, if I remember correctly, that received it. Definitely received, as far as I remember, globally, not in the European Union, more than renewable electricity. But I would like to note here that green hydrogen stimulus includes not only renewable investments, it includes infrastructure that will deliver that hydrogen, also electrolyzers or whatever technologies that you think of. And I'd like to turn to, if you allow me, Paolo, to you. Where do you see the use of hydrogen in the coming years, in green hydrogen in the short term? And I also would like to invite Yasmina on the camera to ask a little bit on Germany, if we have anything in the forecast already coming that we estimated for the next 5 years. Where is the mic? The mic is everywhere.
So the mic is everywhere. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Probably yes. Okay. So indeed, the perspectives of green hydrogen are very positive, and they're actually opened by the fact that of the significant decrease of the cost of green electricity, notably solar and wind. Now, to oversimplify a little bit, in order to have interesting hydrogen from electricity sources, you need to have prices of the electricity that are below or around $30 per megawatt hour, and you need to have a number of full load hours that is at least 4,000 or above. Now, precisely these conditions, with the most recent significant cost decreases of solar and to some extent also wind, are getting interested, and therefore there is a big push in green hydrogen in a number of countries. I would say the most advanced at the moment is maybe in Australia, but definitely there are other zones in the world which have the same conditions, from North Africa and Morocco, from India, from the Gulf region, and also in Latin America, Chile. Now, having said so, from I mean, in the scenarios of the long-term scenarios of the IEA, there is a big jump in the sustainable development scenario of hydrogen need. It's a huge jump, but I think there will be a need for years, and at least these decades, to have really big numbers of hydrogen. But this is the decade where we could see a big jump of hydrogen, of all forms of hydrogen, including the production from renewable based hydrogen based on solar and wind.
Thank you, Paolo. I would like to turn to Yasmina, if you allow me, and I will connect this with another question related to offshore wind, Yasmina, to you. Do we expect, because Germany is obviously one of the largest hydrogen plants, green hydrogen plants that we saw, do we see in the next immediate 5 years the big hydrogen deployment of renewables, or most of the growth will come from classical projects that we expect?
Thank you, Jaime. Well, I would say right now, the forecast for Germany is based off of a current auction schedule for PV and wind, and the offshore component, which is going to be critical, I think, as Paolo had mentioned, it's the full load hours and the price of electricity that will dictate which type of renewable technology could be most cost effective for producing green hydrogen. And right now, that's offshore wind. And our forecast for offshore wind in Germany right now reflects plants that have already been tendered. And so that's predominantly to meet the current demand. However, that's not to say that a plant that's already in operation doesn't sign a corporate PPA or some sort of PPA to produce green hydrogen. In terms of new capacity growth, I think that would depend largely on if the government decides to have specific tenders that are earmarked for just capacity only. So that we'd have to wait and see what the policies are to implement that. But I'd say in the near term, it would really depend mostly on whether or not projects that are already in the pipeline for meeting electricity demand want to go ahead and do like a separate corporate PPA or a separate contract rather than strictly hydrogen only plans.
Thank you very much, Yasmina. This is a very good point. This is the challenge that we had when we looked at those green hydrogen plans, particularly the reason behind it, because you can use new technologies or you can use existing renewable technologies that are amortized to produce green hydrogen in some parts of the world. So we will keep looking at that. But Yasmina, you partially answered my other question. Some people from the audience were asking, is our offshore wind forecast realistic? You touched upon that it's based on projects under construction and auctioned. And I would like to reassess this, that most of our 5-year forecast is based on really those projects either financed or auctioned or will be auctioned and with commissioning deadlines. So we found, I found at least, our offshore forecast pretty solid. There are two questions, and I think Jeremy and Andrea can help me with this if you wish. The question is that on sustainable aviation fuels, they're asking if it's lost opportunity that we raised, and it's actually asking a very basic question. Are there any places in the world where sustainable aviation fuels are already used? And could we actually give a little bit of a background about that? Jeremy, do you want to take it? Should I take it? Andrea, do you want to say something? It's up to you guys.
Pass that to Andrea or you, Amy.
Okay, so I will quickly. So there are, I think, about 150,000 flights were already flown with sustainable aviation fuels. They are usually blended about less than 1 to 2% today, without any additional investments. There are few airports who mandate the use of the sustainable aviation fuels, but when you look at cost differential of these various sustainable aviation fuels, they are still significantly higher than the jet fuel cost that we see, especially in the lower price environment. Obviously, the gap is also grown. But a few years ago, we looked at the price differential at the time when the oil prices was about 65 to 70, if I remember correctly, Paolo. And then we looked at different flights and from London to multiple places, if consumers paid, and then we were basically showing that it will be 2 to 3% for economy passengers, and even less than that for the long haul flights for business class passengers that will cost, which you can charge even more. Obviously, we are not arguing at the IEA that consumers should pay for the additional cost, but at least in order to creation of a demand, it's important to have these policies, especially connected to stimulus packages, that can enable a demand and then enable the allocation and transportation and logistical development of the feedstocks. Plus, the scale up of the demand may result in cost declines in the future. Paolo, do you want to say a few things about the sustainable aviation fuels?
Yes, thanks. Now, my main point here is that you are right. With the current decrease of oil prices and therefore kerosene, the price gap between sustainable aviation biofuels and kerosene has increased. Now, so to oversimplify a bit, in average, you could say the gap now is $1 per liter, which is basically a factor of 4. So is it too expensive? Is the question now, why should we put money in something which is so expensive? There is a good reason for that. The reason is the following. The volumes of these sustainable aviation biofuels are really minimal. It's 0.1 or even less of the total of the fuels. Now, you certainly showed the slide with the bailout industries for aviation, and we had this data that 76 billion of US dollars were understandably and correctly put in an industry sector that was very, very significantly hit by the crisis. Now, if we had 2% of the fuel consumptions of these 30 airlines in 2019 done with sustainable biofuels, that would be around, we estimated 2.7 billion liters of sustainable aviation biofuels. You multiply this by $1, which is our conservative GOP estimate, and you get something in the order of less than 3 billion. Now, this is around 4% of the bailout money that was put to the industry. So my point is that with a rather small extra effort in the industry, you could induce a huge growth in the sustainable aviation biofuels, because this 2.7 billion is a factor 50 growth of the sector. And that would allow the industry to make economies of scale, to have a pipelines of new production facilities, to reduce cost, and even to put up sustainable biofuels supply chains, hopefully reducing the feedstock cost. So at the minimum extra cost, you would do a huge push to a sector for the first steps into something that will be maybe more cost affordable in the future.
Thank you, Paolo, for this quick calculation that actually is very positive. Hopefully, we will be doing that. I would like to invite Piotr here. Maybe others, you can turn off your cameras. Piotr, there's a question on auctions about what do we mean by auctions. I basically pass this to you. It's not related to India, but what do we mean when we mention renewable auctions? You can give the India example to our audience to understand what is auctioned, how, and what is the impact of the deployment.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime, for this question. Well, in general, auction is a scheme in which usually central government agency is trying to sign a power purchase agreement with the generator and the least cost possible. So different investors are bidding for how much they are willing to sell electricity, and the winner is able to sign an agreement and build its installation. And for example, for the next 20 years, sell electricity for a set price. So this is basically how this works, and how this works in India also. And in many countries, this is the main driver of utility scale renewable growth.
Thank you, Piotr. I also would like to add to that you can auction capacity, you can auction specific technologies like they do in India. You can also do hybrid auctions, right, Piotr? There was an example in India about the hybrid auctions. So maybe you want to say a few words on that.
Yes, the details of those auctions may be very different. And for example, in India, this year we saw the emergence of hybrid wind, PV, and storage auctions with certain requirements about the, for example, generation during the peak demand hours. And also another type of auction appeared, the auction where generating capacity is linked with PV manufacturing capacity. So there are really many ways in which the auction organizer can set the rules to achieve what he wants to achieve.
Thank you very much, Piotr. I would like to turn to Trevor. There is a question related to the schemes that we talked about outside of the main policy tools. And in the market that you worked on in Brazil, Trevor, there was a growing interest in this outside auction scheme deployment. Could you maybe give us a little bit of it? This was recently an important trend. Could you give us these information about the free markets, bilateral contracts, and how they work? in Brazil, and what are the risks in this given macroeconomic challenges situation? For those who want to add anything else, please jump in on your markets related to corporate PPAs, and maybe Yasmina could give a little of perspective on previous Spain growth on this one as well, because this was the major driver before. Trevor.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think as we mentioned in the report, an increasing driver of capacity additions for both wind and solar PV in Brazil is coming in what is called the free market. And Jaime, as you were mentioning, these are bilateral agreements, whether they be corporate PPAs between a developer and a business, or private auctions with a utility. And so what we have actually seen over the past few years is as auction capacities have declined, we've seen an increase in the interest for these free market PV projects, whether that be to lower costs due to increased demand, or whether that be to fulfill a green portfolio standard for either a utility or for a business. I think one of the most interesting things that we're going to be seeing in the coming years is, as we've seen the demand shock from COVID-19, if there is going to be a continued appetite for these types of PPAs. With that lower demand come lower wholesale prices, which will impact those PPA prices. In addition, rules in Brazil allow projects that have qualified for auction schemes to connect early before their auction deadline. So we've actually seen an increased amount of projects connecting early, whether that be 6 months or a year, which has increased the amount of capacity in the free market.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Yasmina, do you want to say a few words about the big boom in Spain last year and driven by corporate PPAs, and how the market looks through the corporate PPAs perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Actually, in the near term, a lot of the growth for solar PV in Spain is expected to come from this large pipeline of corporate PPAs that have sprung up in recent years. And as Trevor was mentioning, kind of hinting towards that, it actually sprung up because there wasn't an overall policy support. Auctions have kind of been on hold for a while. And in light of that, developers connected with demand centers because you had good solar resource, the prices had gotten so low, and you had high electricity prices, and there was like this magic combination where it just made sense to do solar PV. And so you had developers stacking different levels of revenue, whether it was going straight into the market or having the spot market, or having part of the revenue being tied to a PPA with a utility or a large consumer. And so it's really driving like the growth in Spain right now for the next 2 or 3 years before auctions start coming.
Thank you very much, Yasmina. And as I mentioned, we see this trend actually all around the world, these kind of new ways of approaching the business plan, as we saw in the policy slide, as Yasmina also mentioned, multiple revenue streams going to the spot market, going to the auction, going to the signing corporate PPAs. We expect these to basically an important driver of the market, not only in Europe, but also in Latin America, increasingly in Asia, including several key markets that will drive the growth. One question which I can answer is related to the projections that we show here and how they are connected to World Energy Outlook. This is a question that we receive prominently. They are more or less in line. The reason why they are not fully in line is particular reason of the timing. We was published 1.5 months ago, and we published just 2 weeks ago. We actually recorrected and re-updated our forecast, but in a ballpark situation in the short term, the numbers that you will see in both markets, both reports, will be quite similar and basically will reflect each other in terms of the deployment rates that you see. There's another important question. We show the good news. I will turn to Paolo on this one as well, about renewables becoming the largest source of electricity generation. But one question remains that, coal plus gas will remain the largest source of electricity, actually, even by 2025. I will ask to you an additional question, Paolo, with these net zero commitments that is basically coming from multiple parts of the world in large economies. Is there a possibility to expect earlier, faster renewable deployment in the next 5 years we are talking about here, and faster surpassing of coal before? I mean, this is a hypothetical question, but the real question here is the policy. So,
you already gave the answer, Amy, which is these targets are very good and very welcome, but they are, of course, the only first step. We need to see how these countries decline these targets into real policy with real impacts, which indeed then could lead to a faster development of renewables. Having said so, I must add that there is a second order effect which is important by these declarations and these targets, is the impacts on the behavior of companies, of industry, of the financial sector, which can then accelerate this process. So it is a general framework and a mindsetting and a narrative which changes, which basically gives one big signal. Net zero emissions are a very difficult task, but basically all these governments are saying it is possible and we will have to do it. Now, this changes. This is a fundamental change with respect to the narrative just a few years ago. So this indirect effect is on top of the real impacts for which you need the policies. So it's too early to judge, but it could be that we are at the start of a virtuous cycle.
thank you very much, Paolo, for this positive and optimistic answer. And I think the report really highlights a good start in the next 5 years for this trajectory. We are 2 minutes before we need to finish this webinar, and I think we answered most of the questions. There is one quick question that I would like to ask to Trevor, which we did not talk about. If he remembers by heart the forecast of Russia, there is a question on Russia. If not, Trevor, we can go back to the person who asked this question. They're asking, what about Russia? Do we expect a huge growth in Russia or not? If you remember certain trends, could you please share with us?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, Russia has had a really strong year already for wind additions, and it looks to be even stronger. It's fueled by a few different things, mostly auction capacity that's starting to come online. And I know that if I remember this correctly, they're looking to potentially tweak the market rules to allow for renewable energy to participate in a wholesale retail market, which will then continue to see more bigger boom of wind in that country. We're also seeing some of the auction capacity in solar PV come online as well. So we are starting to see larger growth within that area. And I know that the government there has placed an emphasis on developing wind technology. So that's something definitely to watch over the next few years.
Thank you very much, Trevor. And I would like to finish with one question about our electricity price assumptions. I mean, obviously, as we mentioned several times, renewables today, more than 90% of renewable capacity has long-term contracts. So they have fixed, usually more than 10-year contracts. And in the future, we expect most of the growth, as we mentioned, coming from auctions, corporate PPAs, or the feed-in tariffs or fixed administratively set contracts by the governments. So we expect those to drive the growth. So electricity price assumptions are really not very prominent in the next 5 years because of the policy. So that's the first point. Obviously, we look at retail prices for competitiveness of distributed PV and decentralized generation. And the trend there obviously is a much less volatile. depending on the country, but historically over the last 10 years, in most markets in the world, we saw retail prices increasing. This is due to taxes or increasing electricity prices and so on and so forth. This basically make self-consumption much more prominent in the coming years. We don't usually comment on what will be the future retail prices, but even if they stay the same or decline slightly or increase, solar PV prices will probably decline faster than that to make those small installations competitive in multiple ways. So I would like to thank everybody for their participation and bearing with us for 90 minutes, which is a long time, we know, in this COVID-19 rush of webinars and Zoom meetings. You were more than actually 200, almost 250 people listening in at some point. And thanks for your attention. Please check our website. We will be sending our presentation to those who participated into this webinar as a PDF format after today or tomorrow. And thank you very much to all the team. You saw all of them who contributed to this report, and big thanks to them for their great efforts. And have a good afternoon, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.